to C-SPAN Common Sense, 400 North Capitol Street, Suite 650, Washington, D.C. The zip code is 20001. Next on C-SPAN 2, a debate between the candidates for the United States Senate from Kansas. Incumbent Republican Senator Robert Dole and his Democratic opponent Gloria Odell were joined in this debate by the independent candidate Christina Campbell Klein and the Libertarian candidate Mark Kirk. This discussion took place on Saturday. The debate was sponsored by KTWU, which is the television station of Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas.
From the KTWU studio in Topeka, Public Broadcasting presents a political forum with the four candidates for United States Senate from the state of Kansas. Mark Kirk of Wichita is the Libertarian Party candidate for Senate. Kirk joined the Libertarian Party in 1985 and has served as an officer in the Kansas Libertarian Party and the Ron Paul for President organization. Kirk is a computer numeric control machinist. The senior senator from Kansas is Bob Dole of Russell, currently in his fourth term as the Senate Republican leader. Dole, a decorated veteran of World War II, has been Senate Majority Leader, the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, a candidate for vice president, a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, the chairman of the Republican Party, a state legislator, and a county attorney. Democratic candidate Gloria Odell was born in Hays and currently lives in Silver Lake. Odell has a master's degree from the University of Kansas and most recently served as the special assistant to the state treasurer. She served as press secretary for former 2nd District Congresswoman Martha Keyes. Odell is involved in various community organizations and was a founding member of Topeka's Every Woman's Resource Center. She served 10 years as a sexual assault counselor. Independent candidate Christina Campbell Klein is a certified public accountant from Wichita. She ran as an independent in the last gubernatorial election. Tonight's moderator is Tama Wagner, State House Bureau Chief for Kansas Public Radio.
Welcome to tonight's forum, the last of 3 this week, with candidates for U.S. Congress from Kansas. The format for tonight's statewide broadcast will again include questions rotated among the candidates asked by 3 other reporters and myself. Candidates will be given 2 minutes to respond to questions. Rebuttals will be limited to 1 minute. Each candidate will have 2 minutes at the end of this forum for a closing statement. In a drawing, candidate Campbell Klein was selected to answer the first question, followed by candidates Odell, Dole, and Kirk. Joining me tonight are Steve Kraske, the State House correspondent for the Kansas City Star, Gordon Basham, news director of KMUW in Wichita, and Lou Ferguson of the Associated Press. Mr. Ferguson will ask the first question, and it will go to Christina Campbell Klein.
Good evening, candidate Campbell Klein. Ross Perot has focused increased attention on the matter of the federal deficit. Many people think our country cannot regain its strength economically or be strong in foreign affairs unless something is done to reduce the federal deficit. What plan do you favor for bringing the federal deficit under control, and can it be done without raising taxes or holding the line on entitlements or making further defense cuts?
I think that the main thing is that I am a certified public accountant. I do taxes, and I have known for 3 years that the people cannot take another raise in taxes. In fact, I have advocated that we simply reduce taxes for the middle class and the poor people. I've seen the tax returns. There is no interest income on the tax return. So forget about raising taxes. Let's lower the taxes on the middle income. So that possibility, as far as I'm concerned, is totally out. The thing about the deficit, and let's quit calling it deficit, because it's surprising how many people don't even know what deficit is. They feel it's something out there, you know, that they don't have to deal with. Deficit is debt. And now I think we all know what debt is. And what we have to do is first get rid of the interest. Perot has some very good solutions to these because he is a businessman. I'm a certified public accountant, also a businesswoman. And so we know that in doing a financial statement, when you come down to the bottom line, you cannot have a net deficit or a loss and come out of it, or you just keep going more and more in debt, just like our federal government, because they have to borrow just to pay the interest. And you cannot get there from, you can't spend and get there for where we have to go. And so what we're going to have to do is, like when I turn corporations around that are bankrupt, the big thing that I do is I negotiate for 50 cents on the dollar. You have to get the debt down. And the other thing is that no annual budget ever goes over. We could get into a real side subject there about the fact that it was a law passed in 1951 that Congress could not spend more than they get in. Some reason Congress ignores that. There is a Graham-Rudman bill.
We're out of time, Campbell Klein. Thank you very much. Candidate O'Dell, same question.
Lou, that is something that nearly everyone talks about. I think that Ross Perot has been an effective messenger, carrier of that message, and I think that he has done a service to all of us to focus on the problems that we have to face. I think that one of the byproducts of his bringing it up is that he has made us look to see what the people in Washington have been doing in ignoring it. I think that he has very correctly shown that part of the problem has been that the people who are making the decisions there first have their political careers in mind, that it's a political decision rather than looking for the public good. I think, in my own commitment to reducing the deficit, I have signed the Lead or Leave pledge, which means that I will work to see that the deficit is reduced by 50% by fiscal year 1996, or I won't seek re-election. I think that the heart of the matter here is having the courage and the conviction and the mathematical ability to determine plus from minus. And I will devote my energies to doing that through a series of steps. We can appropriate some of the peace dividend directly to deficit reduction, 25% of that. We can ask the countries for whom we are providing security to increase their share of that cost. I propose and I support increasing taxes on the upper 2% of Americans. I think that they need to help pay for that. I think that we need to look at investment dollars to make the economic pie increase. I also challenge my opponent to explain why in 1974 he declared the deficit public enemy number one, and today on his watch it has increased 6,000% to about $360 billion.
Thank you, Candidate O'Dell. Candidate Dole, same question.
Well, no doubt about it. I think Ross Perot is focused on a very important issue. The deficit's $4.3 trillion. The interest on the debt's about $250 billion a year. I think for starters, we need a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget. We need a line item veto, whether it's a Republican or Democratic president. 43 governors have it. The President of the United States ought to have it. So if somebody puts something in a bill that can't be justified, he can take it out. I think we also would help if we changed the Congress and gave Republicans an opportunity to run the place. In 1974, all the way up to 1980, the Democrats controlled the Senate. And in 1985, when we had a brief 6-year majority, it was Senator Bob Dole who proposed the toughest budget reduction, I think, in the past 20 years. The vote was 50 to 49. My package passed. Only one Democrat voted for the Dole proposal. So I suggest what we need are men and women in the United States Senate who are willing to say no, who are willing to stand up to the special interest groups, willing to make the tough choices. We haven't heard anybody say what they would do here. I think we ought to have a freeze. You can freeze almost every program. You can take more out of defense. You can't freeze programs that affect low-income Americans, whether it's Medicaid, food stamps, or the WIC program. And that in itself may not be the best policy, but it's something the American people understand. But you've got to start with Congress. They've got to pay the price. The executive branch, the federal agencies have to pay the price. And then we go to the American people. So we're prepared. I'm prepared. My voting record reflects what I've done over the past few years in support of a balanced budget, line item veto, and I've made tough votes to back it up.
Thank you, Candidate Dole. Candidate Kirk, same question.
Well, the reason we have the ballooning national debt is not because we're not taxed enough. It's because Congress spends too much. Our economy couldn't absorb the taxes needed to balance the budget. What we need to do is cut spending. And I would favor any across-the-board tax cut or spending cut. But I also think that we need to eliminate programs and agencies that aren't delivering. Many programs were started with grand promises, but they just have not delivered on those promises. For instance, the Education Department, which since its inception has witnessed a decrease in test scores and a lessening of the education for our children. I think we should return education back to the local entities, or optimally, we should privatize the school system. I think we can eliminate the Energy Department, which wasted millions of dollars on sin-fuel boondoggles that have just been abandoned. And I think that we can eliminate other programs, and that is the way to deal with the deficit. We've got to ask our government to do less. The government can't solve all the problems. They can't manage the economy. You keep hearing about, we need a plan. Everybody has a plan. But government planning doesn't work to run a productive, growing economy. Government doesn't create jobs. It merely taxes some people's jobs away from them and to give another person a job. It doesn't create wealth. It merely redistributes it. Well, we need less government, not more.
Thank you, Candidate Kirk. Candidates, you each now have a 1-minute optional rebuttal if you have anything to add to the discussion on the deficit. Candidate Christina Campbell-Klein, you'll have the first rebuttal.
Well, I don't know whether you say rebuttal, but what I want to say is what we have to do is reduce the interest first, reduce the principal, then of the debt, and then we need to put it on, say, just like a mortgage on a house, we need to take maybe 40 years and pay it back, have it renegotiate the loan that we owe, and come up with a small interest rate. It's the same way that we do in corporations. We treat the government the same way, and I think that is one of the ways. There's spending. We can't. I have a list. I read out a paper of all the areas that we could stop spending, such as $57,000 in gold playing cards for the Air Force II. The Pentagon right now wants $112,000 to build a new wing for additional employees, and we're reducing our defense, reducing employees. I can't understand why they would have to have $112,000, and the list goes on of different ways that we can. We just have to stop spending. And how are you going to do it? We can't get Congress to stop spending. And I say that we go to an initiative and referendum from the people. It's the only way.
Thank you. Candidate O'Dell, 1 minute.
I think that I would agree with the other senator from Kansas, Nancy Kassebaum, in evaluating the balanced budget amendment. She has called it, I think correctly, politics as usual, because it doesn't really require a balanced budget. I think that it's a smokescreen and it's a convenient diversionary tactic, promising something that people do not have the guts and the courage to do, and that is to make the tough decisions and to find some kind of way to make it work. I think that the line item veto is an excellent idea for the president, and I would hope that that would be included within congressional reform to allow Congress, members of Congress, as bills gather and become monsters in their creation, and the final vote has to be up or down with a whole conglomerate of things within one bill, that we ought to look to see about simplifying that process so that there is not so many efforts or so many hidden things that are voted in, even in terms of the bills that Congress votes on.
Thank you. Senator Dole.
Well, I think the record ought to reflect that the Democrats have controlled the Congress most of the past 6 decades. They controlled the House of Representatives 56 out of 60 years. They controlled the Senate 50 out of 60 years. So they can't escape responsibility for deficits or spending or taxes. And I'd also say, with reference to at least I hope it's called leadership, it's been endorsed by such prominent Democrats as Lloyd Bentsen, chairman of the Finance Committee, vice presidential candidate with Michael Dukakis, with Paul Tsongas, presidential candidate this year, both of whom said, had Bob Dole been present, we would have dealt partly with the deficit that's now in place. So I think my record reflects that I not only talk one way in Kansas, I vote the same way in Washington.
Thank you, Candidate Dole. Candidate Kirk, 1 minute.
Well, what we need is a new approach. We've been promised with Graham-Rudman 1, Graham-Rudman 2, the budget compromise of 1990, and they haven't delivered. We need people that will go in there and change, people that are committed to lowering taxes, lowering the spending, and lowering the budget deficit. And the Democrats and the Republicans are both responsible for the situation we find ourselves in today. And I don't think that they should be trusted again after they've failed so many times. I think we really need a change, a breath of fresh air in the Congress to tackle this problem.
Thank you, Candidate Kirk. Our second question will come from Gordon Basham, News Director at KTWU. And Gordon, your question will go to Candidate O'Dell.
Thank you. Good evening, Ms. O'Dell. Numerous studies have shown that there are now more people living below the poverty line in this country than there ever have been in the last 12 years of this country. And over the last 12 years, hundreds of thousands of people either have lost their jobs or have only been able to find minimum wage jobs. My question to you is this: how have you personally been affected by the economic problems of the country?
Well, Gordon, I've worked 2 jobs to make 1 income. I have worked 2 jobs for 5 years to get a mortgage for a down payment on a house. I have stretched, learned to pinch pennies to the extent that I didn't know was possible. I have also been greatly concerned regarding my lack of health care coverage, because when I have worked for employers who have not provided that, I have gone without health care coverage. I have looked and worked with my family who have lived on fixed income and trying to help support them so that they can meet their bills and make ends meet. It has been, I think, a common experience of many Kansans that I share with them. And I share a commitment to make some changes regarding that as we look at job investments, creating jobs, and in looking at such things as the NAFTA treaty to see if indeed that will continue shipping jobs out of this country. I would like, if I could, to use the remaining of my time to address something that Mr. Dole said a little earlier in his rebuttal, and that was a reference to his endorsement, quote unquote, by Senators Bentsen and Tsongas. Their quotes that he is using have been taken out of context. Both of their offices have denied that they are endorsing him. The other thing that I think is important to see is there's one critical difference in that, and I hate to be the person who says the emperor has no clothes. But Senator Dole is not president. He is our senator. And the measurement of his leadership should be in how successful he has been within that body. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate O'Dell. Candidate Dole, same question.
Well, I think you want to limit to the last 12 years. I assume you're not counting the Carter years, right? Just Republican years. Is that your question?
Yes, sir.
You can't go back to the Carter years?
That's go back as far as you want, sir, but the last 12 years specifically.
That's where it started. That's when we had the misery index. You remember the misery index? It got to be 19 or 20% under Jimmy Carter. It's about 10% now. So if we're going to be candid about it and let the viewers have the facts, let's go back to the Carter years where we had high unemployment, high inflation, and high interest rates. And you got a misery index of over 20%. It's now about 10.4%. So that brought along a lot of the problems we've had in the 80s. And we can all go back and recite problems we had maybe not in the 80s, but growing up in our families and our parents, and I guess certainly I had a job. You probably had a job. Maybe it didn't affect you either the last 12 years. It did affect a lot of people. I've been able to help some of my family over the past 12 years because I had a job when they were having difficult times. So there are a lot of aspects. But I think in addition to that, you have to look at what we've tried to do to alleviate some of the hardships that some people face, no question about it. There are real problems in Kansas and real problems in America. Whether it's the homeless bill, the Byrd-Dole homeless bill passed in 1987, bears my name along with Senator Byrd to take care of the homeless people, the first homeless act we passed. What is the Jobs Partner Training Act, which passed in the Senate with my support and my vote. There are a number of programs, whether it's welfare reform, whether it's expanding the food stamp program. I've been a principal architect in many of those programs. And let me just add that both Mr. Tsongas and Mr. Benson made those statements. They're in the public record, and they understand that I've used those in an ad, and they haven't asked that they be withdrawn. They meant what they said when they said Bob Dole. I think Senator Tsongas said, if Bob Dole is your senator, you should be proud.
Thank you, Senator. Candidate Kirk, same question.
Well, it's true that poverty has increased, but the real story is going back even further than Bob Dole, is to go back to the early 50s. Poverty as a percentage of the total population was pegged around 30%. Before the Great Society programs, that was reduced by the free market down to around 15%. Since then, the Great Society programs, after spending trillions of dollars, we've created, instead of the hand up, instead of a handout that we were promised, we have seen a trap that many of the poor find it difficult to surmount. And now, poverty is growing again. And as a percentage of the population, that means as the population as a whole grows, that means that the number of people that are under the poverty level are growing, especially if you subtract the government program benefits that we were promised that it would be a hand up instead of a handout. I think the way to create more jobs is through the free enterprise system. As I said before, government cannot create jobs. It can only transfer jobs from those who they want to bestow, from those that don't find favor with them, to people that they want to bestow favors on. And that's why Washington, D.C. area has done better than the country as a whole.
Thank you. Candidate Campbell Klein, same question.
I am sitting here today because the question is how has it affected me? And I think that I'm angry. I'm angry like all of you are, because what we have is a very high cost of living, whereas you go in to buy a dress, it is $150. I'm amazed that more people that don't realize the real problem that we have right now is the high cost of groceries, the high cost of food, that two parents have to work and leave their children to be latchkey children so they can work and pay their taxes, and high cost of living. And it's amazing that more people don't talk about it, because that is the real issue and what we can do about it. And when I go in to buy a dress and it says made in Korea, I don't buy things anymore that are made in Korea or China. I buy USA. And that is what we're all going to have to do. And when I go in to buy a dress, it is $150, and I see made in Korea, and we talk about, or in China or Mexico, and we talk about cheap labor, that these things are made with overseas, cheap labor, and yet here we have to pay $150 for a dress. Then what is wrong? Who is making all of this money? Surely the people that made that, where they work for what? $1 to $5 an hour. So there's someone getting very, very rich in the large corporations, the executives going to Bermuda, and that is where we have to address some of these issues, the high cost of living.
Thank you. We do have a follow-up question from Gordon Basham.
Ms. Odell, a moment ago you mentioned that you would be willing to sign the lead or leave pledge. And I'd like to ask the other three candidates, if elected, would you be willing to do the same thing? A yes or no will suffice, and then, of course, an explanation, if you would.
In a Democratic Congress, you give me a Republican Congress, I'll sign it. Not in a Democratic Congress. They've controlled, as I've said, the Congress for almost 6 decades. And that's why we've got a big deficit, big spending, and big taxes. Yes, you give me a Republican Congress, and I'll sign it. We only have to sign it. We'll take an oath on the Capitol steps with a Republican Congress and a Republican president. And if we don't succeed, to worry about re-election. We'll leave. But first you have to give us responsibility. You can't have me sign a pledge and have the Democrats run the Congress. That'd be like you signing a pledge and letting some other station set the rules. You wouldn't do that.
Thank you. Candidate Kirk.
Well, as candidate Odell, I've signed the Lead or Leave pledge. I've gone her one better. I've had it notarized. So if I'm elected in a legally binding sense, if the budget isn't on the way to being, the budget deficit problem isn't on the way to being solved, I will not be able to run again.
Thank you. Candidate Campbell Klein.
Pledges don't mean anything. I think all of you probably understand that now. There are political promises continuing all the time, and let's face facts. Time we get things past Congress or the Senate, and then the president has time to veto, you know, the pledges really don't mean anything. And you know, I wouldn't even bother with it, because I know that I'm a CPA and I would do a good job and I would do the best I could. And so I just don't think pledges are just more political promises.
Thank you. We do have a rebuttal segment now. I would like you, though, to limit your rebuttals to actual rebuttals. If you take exception to something one of the other candidates said, then fine, take your minute. If you don't, then let's pass. Does anybody have anything to add?
I do. I do have something to add, both in terms of the follow-up question and initially. I think that what we're looking for is strong leaders with their conviction and knowing they're putting their commitment on the line, and with the goal to do something for the public good, to reduce that deficit. Then political consideration should not be part of it. I think that that is part of politics as usual, that is past, that everyone is fed up with. And I think it is a question of leadership, and to have the gumption to get up and say, this is what I will do, and if I can't, I don't care. My mother never ever let me get by with blaming someone else for something that I couldn't get done. And I don't think we should let our leaders do the same thing. I also think that it should start at home, where they're within their own house. And when Senator Dole can increase his pay $23,000 a year during a time of the greatest recession since the Great Depression, then that is not leadership. That is taking care of themselves.
Thank you.
With political considerations first.
Thank you.
Well,
Senator
let
Dole.
me just address the last thing first. We were being paid less than Dan Glickman, a House member, and Jim Slattery and Pat Roberts and other House members. And I said on the Senate floor, what we ought to do is to get the House to repeal their pay raise. That wasn't going to happen. And it seemed to me that senators ought to be paid the same as House members. We've had 76 votes on pay raises since I've been in Congress. I voted against pay raises 62 times, for pay raises 12 times, and I was absent twice. So I think my record is fairly clear on pay raises. And so it seems to me that that question, it's a one-issue question. Plus, I work hard, and I think it's a little naive to suggest, well, you just sign these pledges and it's going to happen. You got to have votes. You got to have votes. You're not going to get votes to reduce the deficit in a Democratic Congress. You're going to get votes for more taxes and more spending, and that's not going to cut the deficit. I'm sorry, I must disagree.
Thank you, Senator Dole. Anyone else? Rebuttal? Candidate Kirk.
Yes, I would like to say that you've seen gimmicks before. You've heard, you know, that solemn and binding promises made by candidates before, only for them to go back on it. But I would like to point out that an elected Libertarian Congress has never broken a promise. I think that you should, if you're serious about solving some of the financial problems of this country, I think that you should give the Libertarian Party a chance. I take my commitment, my pledge, seriously, and I wouldn't, if I was only wanting to become a professional politician, I would have chosen another party besides the Libertarian Party. We are a band of dedicated people that are dedicated to the principles this country was founded upon.
Thank you. And finally, Christina Campbell-Klein.
Well, I would just like to reply to something. There's some things been going on. Odell just bashed Dole because of his wage increase. And I would like to point out the fact that Ms. Odell, who was Sally Thompson's campaign manager, got a job at the end when Sally Thompson got elected as assistant to treasurer. Believe me, if she ever got up in front of any CPAs and told them that she was assistant treasurer to Sally Thompson CPA, I imagine she would get laughed out of Kansas.
Christine, that's not true. I was not assistant treasurer. I was special assistant to the state treasurer.
You were what?
I was special assistant, legislative
What
assistant.
is the difference between special assistant to treasurer? Is this a
I just wanted to be-
campaign job? Is Sally Thompson paying you my tax money and
No.
the other taxpayers' money to
No,
do this
no,
job
Christina,
for her campaign?
I'm not in the treasurer's office right now.
Oh, I thought you
think
said, no, but you were. But you were.
Thank you. Christina, did you have anything else to add?
No.
Okay, thank you. Our next question will come from Steve Kraske, and it will be directed to candidate Dole.
Senator, I have a question about health care. Experts say that any major reform of our health care system will require sacrifice, from higher taxes and longer waits for medical care to fewer new drugs and a slowdown in the development of high technology equipment. My question is, what types of sacrifices do you foresee in your proposal for health care reform?
Well, again, I'm not certain that I accept the premise. I mean, I think that's what some people say, but we think there are other ways to do it. You don't have those dire results. My view is, keep in mind we've got 200 million people who are now covered by health insurance. So we take the positive attitude, say we've got 200 million Americans covered, we need to cover 34 million more. We've got the best health care delivery system in the world in America. We fall down on infant mortality and longevity for men and women, but in other areas we do very well. We don't have rationing in the United States for health care as they have in Canada under the so-called Canadian plan. So what I would do is build on what we have, not toss it all out and start some so-called pay-or-play plan where you're going to tax the employers 7 to 9% of their payroll and put jobs in jeopardy. First, we have to have some cost containment. We have to control the cost. You've got to make it affordable. So we would give tax credits to families who don't qualify so they could be affordable. We'd also have 100% deduction for the self-employed when they go out and purchase health insurance. Right now, it's 25%. There's no reason it shouldn't be 100%. And we can pay for it, in my view, by looking at Part B Medicare and other areas that ought to be tightened up in the Medicare program without reducing basic benefits, without new taxes, and we can make it work. It's going to require, yes, some sacrifice. We're going to have to contain spiraling hospital costs and physicians' fees, but I'm not prepared yet to put the insurance industry out of business. We can do things to let small companies through managed care programs, let small companies pool their resources, buy one policy. We want to make certain that any insurance is portable, so if you move jobs, you can take it with you. And we also want to make certain that you're not taken out of the plan because of some pre-existing condition. There are many, many facets to it. It's going to be the big, big issue in Congress, whoever's elected president, and it's going to take a couple of years to do it.
Thank you. Candidate Kirk, same question.
Well, my program for health care is to rely on the free market. The free market is responsible for getting us to where we are, the affluence that the country enjoys, and the high technology and high-tech medical care that we enjoy. If If you think we have a problem now, just wait till Congress solves it. You've heard the rationale for all this hue and cry over health care is that we're spending more money than any other country in the world. Well, I'm not so sure how sincere these critics are, because you know that if we were spending less, you'd be hearing things like, we're the richest country in the world, why can't we spend as much health care dollars as such and such a country? You know, if the idea of leadership is to look around at other countries around the world and say, you know, we're not keeping up with these guys. You know, I think America is different, and I'm glad of it. I'm proud of our commitment to liberty and our commitment to free enterprise, and I'm proud that we are the wealthiest country in the world due to our reliance on the free market. And that's the way to solve the health care problem.
Thank you, Candidate Kirk. Candidate Campbell-Klein.
Since 1911, they've been trying to get a national health care through Congress, since 1911. At this current time, there are many, many programs and health care solutions in Congress. We still don't have it. We can't wait on Congress to do this. I'm in favor of bringing more and more things that the federal government does, bring it back to the state level, where it'll be close enough where we can control costs. I'm in favor of having a state committee made up of physicians, made up of the insurance companies, and also the consumers. And they can get together and come up with putting caps on cost of surgery, caps on physicians, and caps on the health insurance. And this is what has to be done. It has to come back to the local level. After this campaign is over, we may not even hear about health care for a long time. 10%, Kansas is better off than most states. 10% of Kansans don't have health care. And so we have to deal with that 10%. And we have to deal with the high cost of what is making the health insurance so high. Like, why don't you check out your medical bills? All medical bills need to go back to the consumer. There's no point in paying $5 for an aspirin. And most of you don't even see your medical bills. You don't know whether you had that or not. That's where we have to have cost containment, and it has to start with the people. It has to start with the committee.
Thank you. Candidate O'Dell, same question.
In a society where we guarantee someone charged with a crime the right to an attorney, I think that we should be able to come up and dedicate ourselves to guaranteeing everyone who is in this country who is ill the right to a doctor. I think we need to remove the litmus test of the size of the wallet and the insurance plan to guaranteeing doctors' care. I think that if the senator and the rest who are here looked at the plight of Kansans, Christina says that there are 10% of the Kansans who are not receiving health care. Actually, there are 500,000, nearly 500,000 Kansans who are uninsured. I think that we need to dedicate ourselves to providing an affordable, accessible health care to every citizen. I think that the $800 billion that we are spending today, with no end in sight in terms of how far that will increase, we can reprioritize and reorder how that money, where that money goes and how it comes. I think that, I support a single player plan which would uncouple insurance coverage from business. I do not believe we need to further strap business with this. I think that I would support a trust fund, a national health trust fund, whereby we would provide the financing mechanism through a federal-state cooperative effort for health care. I think that we need also to look at cost containment, duplication, abuse, unnecessary testing. I think that when we take the approach that we're all in this together, and there may be some jumbling because of it through a transition stage, that we can tackle health care so that when you're ill, you will have.
Thank you, Candidate O'Dell.
care.
We do have a follow-up from Steve Kraske.
Senator, you are the incumbent on the health care issue. Since your last election, can you tell us how much PAC money you've received from the insurance and pharmaceutical industries, and whether you think taking money from those groups compromises your position on the health care question?
Well, the answer is no. It doesn't compromise my position on the issues. The second answer is I want to eliminate PACs altogether. Republicans have voted to eliminate PACs. Democrats want to keep PACs because they get about 96% of labor PAC money and over 50% of business PAC money. They want to continue to take PACs and let the public also finance their campaign. I don't have any idea how much I've received from insurance companies and others who deal with insurance, but I think my record reflects that it's had no impact. And a lot of those people do a lot of business in our state of Kansas. But I'm willing to eliminate PACs. Do it today. Democrats don't want to do it. They've got the best of both worlds. They get half the business PAC money and all the labor PAC money. And it's not going to end. It's not going to end as long as Democrats control the Congress.
Thank you. Ms. Campbell-Klein, did you have something to say?
Yes, I want to address Ms. Odell's trust fund idea. We have a trust fund with Social Security. Okay, the federal government has borrowed almost all of the money in the Social Security. I think having a trust fund for the medical would be as disastrous as having a trust fund for the Social Security. And we've already seen the government's inefficiency. We've already seen how the government puts us in debt. We cannot risk having a national health care system again. We have to bring it down to the state level, local level. And when Ms. Odell says about my 10% without health care, she says 500,000. So is 10% 500,000?
Thank you. We're going to do some juggling around now. We'll only have 1 minute for answers. We will have follow-ups, but no further rebuttals. My question is next, and it goes to Candidate Kirk. Candidate Kirk, what would Kansas lose if Bob Dole is not reelected this election year?
Well, we'd lose, if I was elected, we'd lose one minority leader. We'd lose one minority leader, but I would probably become another minority leader. We would, there's no doubt about it that Bob Dole can bring home the bacon to Kansas. And I'm running in this race to offer our alternative. I think the problems besetting our country are serious enough that we need to stop with the parochial interest. We need to get the problem solved. You know, Kansas is taking a leading role in many changes that have come to our country, like the Civil War, Prohibition. I don't agree with Prohibition, but I would like to see Kansas send a message to Washington that we are going to get serious about solving this deficit problem.
Thank you. Candidate Campbell-Klein.
Would you repeat the question, please?
Certainly. What would Kansas lose if Bob Dole is not reelected this year?
Well, I think there's a kind of a misconception about Kansas. Actually, we are ranked about 11th down the line as far as really doing quite well considering all the 50 states. So Kansas isn't in nearly as bad a position as some of the other states. I think Bob Dole has done a lot. He has had a lot of power. He's taken 32 years to get that power. And I think that we would lose a great deal by not having Bob Dole there with that power. I think now is the wrong time maybe to come in with a freshman senator. Now, when I started running, I did not know that Bob Dole was going to run. I firmly thought that he would not run. But after I found out he was going to run, I was too far into this really to pull out. But I do think that although he's been bashed a lot, and we know by bashing you get into the newspapers, and so he's been bashed by a lot of untruths, but he has had the power. He has done things for Kansas.
Candidate Odell, same question.
I think that we lose Bob Dole. I don't think that we lose the power that comes from the vote to the people to their representative. I think that we have the opportunity for the transition to bring a new voice, a voice that can help break gridlock. What we have gotten for that longevity, in his own words, is stalemate and gridlock, politics as usual, very partisan politics. I think that the future says we need to work together, and a new voice, a change, is what we are looking for, and that is the definition of power today.
Thank you. Senator Dole?
I get to answer that question.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm a strong voice for Kansas. I'm not perfect, and I make mistakes, and I know people disagree with my voting record sometimes, whether Republicans or Democrats or independents, but I think the point is that I've kept in touch with my state. I know the people in my state of Kansas. I was out here 31 times last year, held town meetings in all 105 counties, been out here 20-some times this year, even though I had a little temporary excuse because of prostate cancer early this year. And I do believe that it's important for Kansas to have influence. I think Senator Kassebaum and I make a good team, and we don't agree on every issue either. But I think together we're strong voices for the state of Kansas. We work hard. We have a lot of friends on both sides of the aisle. We make our voices heard. We press the case for Kansas. That's what we're there for. We'll vote for balanced budgets, line item vetoes, cut spending, but if there's anything left, then I think it's my obligation as a senator from Kansas to try to get just a bit of that for the state of Kansas, or it's going to go somewhere else.
Thank you, Senator. We do have a follow-up from Lou Ferguson.
My question is to candidate O'Dell, and that is, how can you convince the people of Kansas that electing a freshman senator of the majority party can equate with having perhaps the most important Republican in Washington from Kansas if Bill Clinton wins the presidency?
Well, I think that Senator Dole has answered that himself. He has said that with the election of a Democratic president, that we will continue gridlock. And he has the same power in that position as most of the special interest groups do. The power to block, to stop, and to circumvent anything that comes before the Congress. There's very little power in initiating and leading the way in getting something done, forging a consensus. I think that, indeed, if we even go on Senator Dole's recommendation, I will be the next senator from Kansas to serve with President Clinton.
Thank you, Candidate O'Dell. We will go to our closing statements. Candidate Kirk, you have the first closing statement.
I'd like to thank KTWU for sponsoring this forum, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that my opponents agreed to be here. It's quite different than the presidential debates where my candidate, the candidate of my party, Andre Maru, was excluded, although he's on the ballot in all 50 states. I'm running because I believe strongly in the principles of liberty and free enterprise. I believe those are the principles that this country was founded upon, and they are the principles that are propelled this country to greatness. I think that government today, by promising everything to everybody, has turned their backs on those principles. The rights guaranteed by the Constitution were meant to limit government. They were inalienable. They belonged to the people. Now we hear these rights that government bestows on the people. You know, the reason we have a right to a lawyer is because that is a curb on government. We have a lawyer to represent us when our life and property are at stake in a government courtroom. I believe that rights are universal among all people, no matter where they were born or when they were born. And you don't have a right to a CAT scan or a nuclear magnetic resonance scanning technology. I mean, Tom, if you had a right, then people 200 years ago should have the right, and people in Somali should have the right to. I believe that the rights belong to people.
Thank you, Candidate Kirk. Candidate Campbell-Klein.
Well, I think that my introduction was very short. May I have another minute? It was left out that I am a certified public accountant. I've been in business most of my life. I have a CPA firm, my own firm in Wichita, Kansas. I've been involved in turning bankrupt companies around, and I think that is what this is all about, is the federal government trying to turn it around. And I know taxes. I'm worth $50 to $100 to $200 an hour in my office, and I don't doubt very seriously anyone at this table is worth that much in their office. And I have decided to come out, and I'm not asking for your vote. What I'm asking for this is I decided to give you 6 years of my life, and that is what it has been. And I am doing this for you, the public. I am not doing this for me because, believe me, I'd rather be sitting in my office with the swans drifting by, and I love to play tennis, and I love to be doing those things, and I haven't done those for about 6 months. I've been on the street corner for 4 months getting signatures, and the one thing, the one democratic way of getting on the ballot is by getting petitions, and that is the only way I can get on, and there's no PACs, there's no party behind that, there's just been given around $500, and that is what all of you have been talking about. Get rid of the special interest, get rid of all the party money, and let's do something different. Let's do a democratic way, and that I am the one that is doing that. I am your answer to what you have wanted to see that happen. And believe me, if somebody doesn't come along behind me and reestablish this, the fact that we can do this, that we can get on the ballot by signatures, the signatures keep going up every year. And that also will disappear, the only democratic way of getting on the ballot.
Thank you, Candidate Campbell-Klein. Candidate O'Dell.
Thank you very much to PBS and Channel 11 for sponsoring the only television debate among the senatorial candidates, the only statewide campaign this year in Kansas. I think it's important to acknowledge right up front that Senator Dole has preached the politics of fear this election year when he says a small state like Kansas will not survive should he not be reelected along with George Bush. I think that what I have been finding as I talk with people across Kansas, that they want change, that the way that we can effect change the most effectively this year by one stroke of the pen is by voting for me on November the 3rd. It will rock the halls of Congress should the special interest professional politician, as exemplified by Bob Dole, is removed. When I ran for office, I called it Gloria versus Goliath. I am an average Kansan voter with hope and commitment and courage to address the problems that face us today. I am up against a well-funded career politician, a 32-year incumbent Washington insider. Today, he sits as a candidate like the rest of us. The framers of our Constitution envisioned this kind of moment because, indeed, when all is said and done, the power rests in the voter, not in the money or the privilege or the trappings of high office. I ask, as you go to the voting booth on November the 3rd, you need to decide if the Kansas and America that we have today is good enough, or do we need a change, a commitment to do better, to forge a way for change with a new plan. I ask for your vote on November the 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate O'Dell and Candidate Dole.
Well, first let me thank my fellow candidates for the U.S. Senate, and I appreciate the debates we've had in Garden City and here in Topeka, and I thank Channel 11 and certainly the panelists who've taken their time this evening away from the World Series to be with us, and I'm certain you'll be happy to get out of here. But in any event, as I said earlier, you know, this is a very difficult choice. I've always said I'm not perfect. The Republican Party is not perfect. I've made mistakes. I haven't forgotten where I'm from. I'm going back to my hometown tonight, Russell, Kansas. I know where I'm from. I know precisely how I got where I am, and I've never forgotten it. And I've never forgotten the people who helped put me there. My attitude has always been that if you climb up the ladder and you sort of get maybe halfway to the top or maybe to the top, you better reach back and help somebody else up that ladder because a lot of people got you there. And that's been my attitude. Maybe I've slipped somewhere along the line. I know that you don't please everybody in politics. It's not possible. But I don't check people's party affiliations before we go to bat for them in Congress, whether it's farm aid or whether it's food stamps or whether it's Medicare or Medicaid or whether it's helping hospitals or helping someone with a passport problem or helping anybody with any problem they have. Sometimes we can't do it. Sometimes we can. And I just would ask you, if you think I've worked hard, which I do 6 days a week when I'm in Washington, if you think I deserve another term in the United States Senate, which I believe I've worked hard and deserve your trust, then I'd ask you to vote for me on November 3rd. It's a choice that you'll make in a free country, in a free society, and I certainly want to say thanks to everyone, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, who have supported me over the years, and I hope I've earned your trust for 6 more years.
Thank you, Candidate Dole. We do have a few moments left, and we're going to go to a real quick round of questions, first from Steve Kraske.
Start with candidate Campbell Klein. Would you support legislation guaranteeing a woman the right to have an abortion? Yes or no?
I pass. Sorry. It is not something that you can say no or yes to. It is very
Candidate
complicated,
O'Dell, do you want to go on?
unfair
Yes.
question. Very unfair question.
Candidate Dole.
Not on demand, no. I think there ought to be some restraints, and I think that's the Casey case in Pennsylvania, and I think that's the Supreme Court upheld that case.
Thank you, Candidate Kirk.
Yeah. You gotta explain it too. You just can't say yes or no to that question because that doesn't answer the question.
Yes or no.
Candidate Kirk.
I would say I favor the right to a woman to choose, but not in the sense that rights are used by the Democrats where if they can't afford one, that one will be provided for them.
Thank you. Perhaps this one will be easier. Do you support term limits? Let's start with Candidate O'Dell.
No.
Candidate.
No, I don't support term limits. Now, to get back to the other question, do you want to use abortion for birth selection? Is that what you're advocating on demand? I don't think most Americans want that.
Thank you, Senator. Candidate Kirk.
I support term limits.
And Candidate Campbell
Yes,
Klein.
I support term limitations.
Well, we're still not out of time, so how about this one? Who do you think is going to win the presidential race? Candidate Dole.
I meant gender selection, not birth selection. I think President Bush will win the presidential election.
Candidate Kirk.
Well, all I know is what I read in the papers. So,
You're not very well informed.
Candidate Campbell Klein.
We're $4 trillion in debt. Clinton keeps talking spending as Democrats
Which one,
always
Candidate Campbell Klein?
have done. What?
Candidate O'Dell.
Governor Clinton will be the next president.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us tonight for this statewide forum with the candidates for the U.S. Senate. We hope you have found this forum useful as you prepare to vote next month. On Monday night at 6, 3 of the presidential candidates will debate for the third and final time. We invite you to tune to this station for that event. Our thanks to all of tonight's participants for taking part. I'm Tama Wagner for KTWU and Kansas Public Radio. Good night.
Join C-SPAN, our companion network, Tuesday morning at 8:15 Eastern Time for a live interview with Larry Hujic, Vice President of the Gallup Organization. Mr. Hujic will join us to talk about the science of polling. Our program will also feature video of post-debate polling in Lincoln, Nebraska, and at the Gallup Organization's polling center. That's coming up at 8:15 a.m. Eastern, 5:15 a.m. Pacific Time on our companion public affairs network, C-SPAN.